Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Melanie, the designer behind Wildflower Design Patterns, and today we're going to be sewing the Coquelicot Skirt step by step. The Coquelicot Skirt is a split-side skirt with an adjustable waistband and large 18th century inspired pockets. We are going to be sewing view B of the pattern, which has an inner lace-up waistband and full swishy gathered skirt. The wide inner waistband makes the skirt very comfortable to wear and helps support the weight of the full gathered circle skirt. The front of the skirt is wrapped over the back and tied with ties. A variety of lightweight to medium weight woven fabrics would work well for this pattern, such as linen, cotton poplin, lightweight wool suiting, and viscose twill are a few examples. I would recommend using a sturdy fabric in at least one layer of the inner waistband. If you're using a drapey fabric like I am, it gives the piece more structure. Alternatively, you can interface both sides of the inner waistband rather than the one if you're using a drapey fabric for your entire project. For view B of the pattern, you will need fashion fabric. I am sewing the skirt with a viscose twill fabric, and I'm using a light quilting cotton for the inner waistband. Lightweight interfacing, and I decided to use a bit of a sturdier interfacing for the inner waistband. And a thin ribbon for the lacing panel. Let's get started! Start by applying interfacing to the front waistband, the lacing panel, the outer back waistband, and the inner waistband. You will place the interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric with the glue side of the interfacing facing downwards. Press and hold the iron in place for 10 to 15 seconds before moving on to another spot. Here I'm using a sturdier interfacing for the inner waistband, as I had decided to cut it out without the seam allowance to reduce bulk when sewing. For the pocket, start by pressing the pocket bias binding in half lengthwise, creating a line in the center. Open up the bias, then turn in and press the outer edges to meet the center line. Finally, fold the bias in half lengthwise and press. It can be helpful to place a heavy object like a book onto the bias binding while it cools, which will help it keep its shape. Take the front pocket pieces and mark the cutting line for the pocket opening with chalk or a fabric pen. Here I am folding the pattern piece to help me transfer the markings onto the right side of the front pocket piece. Cut down the slit and cut little notches at the tip, which will help the opening lay flat when sewing the bias binding onto it. There are a couple of ways in which you can sew the bias binding, and I will demonstrate the different ways on each pocket. For the first method, open the pocket slit and unfold the bias binding and place the bias so that it is facing right sides together with the front pocket. Feel free to pin as much or as little as you wish. Sew the bias binding onto the pocket with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. Here I am taking my time once I reach the center of the pocket opening to ensure that I am catching the pocket fabric at the edge of the center notches. Once that is sewn on, press the pocket fabric towards the bias and fold the bias towards the wrong side. Top stitch by machine or hand stitch if you prefer an invisible finish. If you wish, you can finish the tip of the pocket slit by turning the bias to the inside, then sewing diagonally from the tip out to the outer edge of the pocket. Next, overlap the front of the pocket over the back pocket by about 2 centimeters up to the notch and baste into place. For the second pocket, I will sew the second method for sewing the bias facing, which is kind of a shortcut of what we just did. Simply insert the edge of the pocket slit into the bias binding and top stitch, making sure to sew both sides of the bias tape onto the pocket fabric. I'm sewing my pockets with French seams since I'm using a lightweight viscose fabric which frays quite a bit. So if you do not want to sew French seams, you can follow the pocket instructions included in the instructions booklet, which will have you sew the pocket front to the back, right sides together with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. For French seams, take the back pocket pieces and place the front pocket piece so that they are wrong sides together. Sew around the curved edge with a seam allowance of 5 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. Trim away a couple millimeters and any frayed bits, then turn the pocket so that the right sides are together and press the seam out before sewing the seam again with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Once the curved edges are sewn up, turn it right sides out and give it a good press, working the edges of the seam out. Baste the top edge of the pocket together with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Finish the straight edge of the pockets by overlocker, zigzag, or bias binding as I am doing here. Start by stay stitching the waistband of all the skirt panels to prevent the curved edges from stretching out. Sew within the seam allowance at about 6 to 10 millimeters or 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch from the edge. For the front skirt panels, pin and sew 2 of the panels together along the edges without notches. Finish and press open seam. Then sew another skirt front panel on each side, matching center notches. For the back skirt panels, sew them together along the edges with notches spaced apart. Finish and press open those seams. Then sew another back skirt panel on each side, matching double center notch. To help distinguish the front and back skirt panels, the center notches for the front have a single center notch, while the back panels have a double center notch. Sew the skirt panels with a total seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters, 5/8 of an inch. I am sewing the skirt panels with French seams like I did for the pockets, so I will be sewing them first wrong sides together with a seam allowance of 5 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch, then right sides together with a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. Finish the raw straight edges of the back skirt by overlocking, zigzag stitching, or bias binding like I am doing here. For the front skirt, turn in the seam allowance from the sides 5 to 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch, then again at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, then top stitch down close to the folded edge. Next, we will be sewing gathering stitches to the skirt. Using a large stitch length, baste the line at 0.5 centimeters and 1 centimeter, or 1/4 of an inch, then again at 3/8 of an inch, along the top edge of the front and the back skirt. Take the threads from the bobbin side and pull them gently, gathering the fabric to the correct width as indicated in the chart in the instruction booklet. Once you have the gathering completed, wrap the loose threads around a pin to ensure the gathers don't come loose. Adjust the gathers so that they are nice and even. Next, place the pockets so that they're facing right sides together with the skirt and stitch them along the straight edge with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Turn the pocket out and press. Then top stitch along the edge of the pockets with the seam allowance of the skirt going towards the pockets. Start by pressing the lacing loop strip the same way we did with the pocket bias binding. Sew along at the edge at 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Cut the strip into 6 pieces about 8 centimeters or 3 inches long. Next up, place the waistband pieces right sides together, Pin and sew along the outer edges with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch, starting and ending at the notches at each bottom corner. Shape the strips into loops and pin to the right side of the waistband between the two layers with the loop facing inwards. Baste the loops into place with a 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then sew the remainder of the waistband at 1.5 centimeters, 5/8 of an inch. Trim the seam allowance down to about half and then clip into the seam allowance around the curved edges, being careful not to clip into the seam. Turn the inner waistband right sides out and give it a good press, and then top stitch along the outer edge. Next, place the lacing panel pieces right sides together and sew along the curved edges with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch, leaving the straight edge open. Trim down the seam to about half and clip into the curves. Turn it right side out and give it a good press. Turn in the straight edge of the lacing panels about 1.5 centimeters. then top stitch along the entire panel a few millimeters from the edge. Pin the lacing panel to the inner waistband by overlapping the waistband over the panel along the concave curve by approximately 1.5 centimeters, 5/8 of an inch. Top stitch 3 millimeters from the edge over the existing top stitching on the waistband. And here's the inner waistband completed. Place the right side of the inner waistband to the wrong side inside of the back skirt. Align the center notch with the back center seam and the notches where the skirt meets the pockets. Pin and baste at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Next, place the back waistband piece right sides together with the back skirt, aligning notches for the center back and the notches for where the skirt meets the pockets. Pin and sew at 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press the band upwards, then turn in the top edge of the waistband by 1.5 centimeters. Then fold over just so that the edge passes the stitching line and pin into place. Turn in the outer edges. I have decided to stitch the waistband down by hand, but feel free to top stitch from the outside if you prefer. And here's the finished result. Sew together the front waistband to the ties, right sides together along the short ends, creating one long piece, with the front waistband piece in the center. Sew with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters, then press open the seams. Place the front waistband piece right sides together with the top of the front skirt aligning the center notch, and the edge of the skirt should match up to the seam of the ties and the waistband. Pin and sew at 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Fold the ties in half lengthwise so that they are right sides together. Press and pin in place if needed. Sew 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch, starting from the short end of the one side, pivot, and then sew just up to before where the ties meet the front waistband. Once you reach the waistband, backstitch. Repeat to the other side. Clip the corners and turn out the ties to the right side. For this step, I find it useful to use something like a pencil or the end of a wooden spoon to help me turn out the ties. Take the blunt end of the pencil and place it at the end of the tie and gently push the fabric over the pencil, like so. It helps to wet your fingers a bit to get a grip of the fabric. Work the corners out and give the ties a good press. Turn in the raw edge of the waistband by 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch and fold over to just past the stitching line. Stitch the waistband down either by top stitching or stitching in the ditch, which means you stitch right on the seam line between the waistband and the skirt, or hand stitch if you prefer no visible top stitching. Before attaching the front and back skirt together, let your skirt hang on a hanger or dress form for a minimum of 24 hours, if not more, to allow the sides on the bias to stretch out. After hanging, the hem will need to be trimmed where it has grown. Every fabric type will behave a bit differently, and therefore some may grow more than others. To correct the stretched out hem, fold in the top edge of the seam allowance portion on the skirt pattern piece and pin it in place at the seam line under the waistband, and smooth out the skirt as best as you can. The pattern piece will go over 2 skirt panels for the gathered skirt. As you can see, the hem is quite uneven. Trim the skirt hem down, then continue to the other side. Repeat for the front side as well. You may need to consider the length of your skirt in relation to your figure proportions. If your weight isn't generally distributed evenly across the circumference of your hips, say you are larger behind than in the front, or larger in the front than the back, then the skirt hem may become unbalanced. As you can see in the diagram, the first figure shows the skirt hiking up at the back, since this person has a larger behind and more length is required at the back. The second figure has a larger belly than her behind, so this shows the opposite problem. To correct this, wear the skirt and have someone help you even out the hem by measuring from the floor with a meter or yardstick, and mark the skirt with pins or chalk at the correct height for the turning edge. Lay the back skirt right sides up and overlap the front right side facing up over it. Align the top waistband seam and pin down the length of the seam to keep it in place. Mark with chalk or a pin 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch above the bottom edge of the pocket. Create a bar tack horizontally, then pivot and top stitch down towards the hem along the edge of the front skirt 2 to 3 millimeters or about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Repeat the same process on the other side. Cut out strips of bias for the bias hem facing about the length of the hem of your skirt. You can download a free bias hem ruler that is available on my website, which I will link below, or feel free to cut the strips out as wide as you like. To create a long continuous strip, place the bias strips right sides together, one horizontally and one piece vertically. Overlap them so the ends stick out a bit. Sew the pieces together starting at one corner and ending at the opposite corner. Make sure you backstitch a couple times at the beginning and at the end of the seam. Continue attaching the rest of the pieces in the same manner. Trim away the excess, leaving about 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press the seams open. This is optional, but before pinning the bias strip to the hem, you can shape the strip into a more rounded shape with your iron, curving and gently pulling on the top edge of one side while ironing. Place and pin the bias strip right sides together with the hem of the skirt and turn in the short edge. Here I am trimming away the excess and overlapping the end of the bias over the folded portion. Sew down with a seam allowance of 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch. Press down the bias strip and understitch it to the seam allowance, 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. Turn the skirt inside out and then fold and press the raw edge of the bias strip in by 1.5 centimeters, and then fold that in and press it to the wrong side of the skirt. Pin and sew down a few millimeters from the edge of the bias facing. Place your ribbon through the loops and voila, you're all done. Here's the finished result. Thank you for watching and subscribing. Let me know your thoughts about the Coquelicot skirt in the comments below. Happy sewing!